Okay, so today, Mr. Bernie actually chose a lovely story called Frog and Toad, if you've ever heard of that, by Arnold Lobel. And this one is spring. But real quick, I wanted to talk about frogs and how important they are. Because it is spring, so they're an integral part of the food web, right? That when they're tadpoles, they eat the algae and clean the bottoms. When they're adult frogs, they eat insects. And then, of course, predators also eat frogs. And then also, frogs are bioindicators of ecosystems. Because their skin is so delicate, it's easy for us to tell if an ecosystem, land or water, because they can live in both, depending on the frog, how well our ecosystem or environment is doing. So on that note, I want to make some noises. So we have frog and toad. So I'm assuming that frog is going to be a bullfrog, and bullfrogs are native to this area. So does anyone know what a bullfrog sounds like? What do you think it sounds like?
It sounds like,
That's okay. You got it. They're very silent until they're not, right? Yes. All right, so I want everybody to make a bullfrog sound, which is wah, 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 wah. Come on, guys, make it. Wah, wah, wah. Okay. And this one's a little more tricky, so if you can't roll your tongue, good luck. This is called an American toad. You would think maybe this was a frog, but it's not. And they go, y'all did way better on that one. Thank you. Okay, so this is Spring by Arnold Lobel. Frog ran up the path to Toad's house. He knocked on the front door. There was no answer. Toad, Toad, shouted Frog. Wake up, it's spring, said a voice from inside the house. Toad, Toad, cried Frog. The sun is shining. The snow is melting. Wake up,
I am not here,
said the voice. Frog walked inside the house. It was dark. All the shutters were closed. Toad, where are you? Said Frog.
Go away,
Said the voice from a corner of the room. Toad was lying in bed. He had pulled all the covers over his head. Frog pushed Toad out of bed onto the front porch. Toad blinked in the bright sun.
help, I
Said
cannot see anything.
Don't be silly, said Frog. What you see is the warm light of April, and it means that we can begin a whole new year together. Toad, think of it, said Frog. We will skip through the meadows and run through the woods and swim in the river. In the evenings, we will sit in front of his porch and count the stars. You cannot count them.
You can count them, Frog. I will be too tired. I am going back to bed.
Toad went back into the house. He got into the bed and pulled the covers all over his head again. But Toad, cried Frog, you will miss all the fun.
Listen, Frog,
Said Toad.
how long have I been asleep?
You have been asleep since November, said Frog.
Well then, a little more sleep will not hurt me. Come back again and wake me up at about past May. Good night, Frog.
But Toad, said Frog, I will be lonely until then. Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Frog looked at Toad's calendar. The November page was still on top. So Frog tore off the November page, tore off the December page, the January page, the February page, and the March page. When he came to the April page, Frog tore that page off too. Then Frog ran back to Toad's house. Toad, Toad, wake up, it is now May!
What? Can it be May so soon?
Yes, said Frog. Look at your calendar. Toad looked at the calendar. The May page was on top.
Why, it is May, said Toad.
As he climbed out of bed, then he and Frog ran outside to see how the world was looking in the spring.
You run ahead, I'll catch up.
The end. So now we're going to sing our kiddos out, right?
I believe so.
Yep. Okay.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Each month, we as a community take time to reflect on a theme. The children do this in their classes, and we do it here in worship in our small groups. This month, the theme is renewing faith. And reflecting on renewing faith, I have to admit, I had a bit of a struggle. I get the renewing part, making something new again, recharging, rebuilding, refreshing, refurbishing, re-energizing, rededicating. But faith? Now there you got me. When I say the word faith, the first thing that comes to my mind is believing in something for which there is no proof. Faith in God, faith in gods, fairies, myths, systems for picking winning Powerball tickets, or faith as a structured worldview around beliefs in something for which there is no proof. The Protestant faith, the Catholic faith. As one tending toward the Buddhist end of the spiritual spectrum, these concepts of faith simply do not resonate with me. That being said, I did grow up in a primarily Christian environment. I have always admired the teachings and actions of Jesus. The divine stuff, the miracles, the rising from the dead part, well, I found these a bit hard to swallow. When in my 20s, I learned about the Buddha and Buddhism, something clicked within me. Well, maybe gonged is a better word. And ever since, I've been looking at the world through a Buddhist lens with a slight Christian tint to it. I sometimes describe myself as a Zen Baptist or a Tibetan Methodist. I'm drawn by the messages and acts of Jesus and what he practiced with the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment. So when I reflect on renewing faith, I think of faith in terms of sincerity of intent, doing something in good faith. And that I can take to heart. That I can renew. I can make new again. I can recharge. I can rebuild. I can refresh. I can refurbish. I can re-energize. I can rededicate. This is a time in our service when we draw to heart and mind those in our midst who are suffering and those who feel the sweet relief of burdens easing, especially those impacted by war and aggression. We grieve for the loss of energy and time chronic illness takes on the body and mind. And our hearts go out to all who are struggling to make ends meet, especially now. We give our love to those untangling themselves from relationships that no longer serve them, and we extend our gratitude to people who make caring for children their primary spiritual practice. And we join in wonder with all people who are bravely facing their final days. And as always, we rejoice over the exquisite beauty in this world, as small or life-changing as each piece of beauty may be. And now I invite you to come forward and briefly share in 2 or 3 sentences a rare joy or profound sorrow and light a candle.
So I guess this, are we on? So I guess this would be a joy. I'm Bernard Norcott-Mahany. I've been up there already. The opening song, or the opening piece by Leo Kottke, was one of the pieces of my wedding to Carla Norcott-Mahany. It was our gathering music, followed by Morning Has Broken. So it is a song that I think of a lot.
Hello. Hi. I have a joy and a sorrow. Our sorrow is that we lost our family friend Rosemary to cancer this week, so I ask you just to keep her husband Lonnie in your thoughts and prayers this week as he figures out how to go on without her. And our joy is that our daughter Kiki got her first opportunity to wear scrubs through her health program at school. She's 16 and she's very excited about that.
And I'm Jim Christ. I have a candle of concern for Paul Spahn, who last week suffered a broken hip. He had surgery and it went very well, and he is in rehab right now and would, I'm sure, appreciate any notes or cards you would like to send. Paul and Carolyn's address is in our online directory. If you don't know how to access it, see me afterwards and I'll share their address with you. And I will light the remaining candles for all the joys and sorrows in our hearts that go unspoken.
So put your feet on the ground, get sort of settled in your seat, take a deep breath. I would do that, but I'm likely to start coughing, and that would not be good. Take another. I invite you to close your eyes for the reflection this time. This is a piece by Carolyn Owen Toole entitled Fragile and Rooted. See a blossom in your mind's eye. Allow it to fill the interior of your imagination. Greater perfection of form in nature cannot be imagined. With inward gaze, absorb each wondrous fluted petal. Slide down its humid surface until you drop as the dew into its velvety core. Imagine your senses in this safe chamber. Such fragile beauty fights an impulse to weep. Slowly reverse the journey as you ascend the shaft toward wider light. Turn your imagination around and around to see its many facets. Stored within is the memory of all flowers. Marvel that this creation, while utterly fragile, yet undaunted, boldly buds forth, turning resolutely toward the sun. We too shimmer with expectation, exuding our own illumination, color, pulse, and scent. Vulnerable, still we venture our lives courageously toward hope and light, at once fragile and rooted. And now we have the meditative hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life.
By E. Cummings, one of my favorite poems. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue, true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are open.
By the Road to the Contagious Hospital, Poem 1 of Spring and All by William Carlos Williams. By the road to the contagious hospital, under the surge of the blue mottled clouds driven from the northeast, a cold wind. Beyond, the waste of broad, muddy fields, brown with dried weeds, standing and fallen. Patches of standing water, the scattering of tall trees. All along the road, the reddish, purplish, forked, upstanding, twiggy stuff of bushes and small trees with dead, brown leaves under them, leafless vines. Lifeless in appearance, sluggish, dazed spring approaches. They enter the new world naked, cold, uncertain of all save that they enter. All about them the cold, familiar wind. Now, the grass. Tomorrow, the stiff curl of wild carrot leaf. One by one, objects are defined. It quickens. Clarity, outline of leaf. But now, the stark dignity of entrance. Still, the profound change has come upon them. Rooted, they grip down and begin to awaken. I can feel the sap moving in the trees. That's what she said to me in March of 1992. I can feel the sap moving in the trees. When she being Cynthia Bishop, a storyteller I knew in Syracuse, New York, said this, my reaction was probably something like this. Well, not outwardly, as I was then and still am very fond of Miss Bishop and would not have done something so jarring, but inwardly. In 1992, I was still very much in my head and still accustomed to such earthy feelings. Still, that statement, I can feel the sap moving in the trees, stayed with me. It stays with me still and springs to mind whenever the wheel turns from winter to spring. And in that spring, I found myself becoming ever more aware of nature in and around Syracuse. I never got to the point where I could say that I could feel the sap moving in the trees, but I felt more awake to the world of nature than I had. And her statement got me reflecting back on my college years and on a realization that something in my body did respond to the change of season, especially the change from winter to spring. As an undergraduate, I always took more challenging courses in the spring and did more all-nighters than I did in the fall. And yet, it is in the spring terms where I felt the best and consequently rose to the challenge. At some level, I felt the difference in the air as I walked around the campus, wrestling with whatever paper idea that I needed to tame before I sat down at the typewriter. I could never put a finger on what it was, but the air smelled sweeter, more inviting. Who knows? Maybe I could and did feel the sap moving in the linden trees along Linden Lane on campus. You get some of that animation in the greenery in Cummings' poem that Carla read, when Cummings talks about the leaping greenly spirits of trees and of rebirth, I who was dead am alive today, which we see in the leaves returning to trees and flowers beginning to appear in bloom, a rebirth we feel in ourselves, not resuscitation from the grave, but more like animate life coming out of hibernation, something the Beatle George Harrison alludes to when he celebrates the return of the sun after what could only be called a long, cold, lonely winter. And for us who have undergone almost 2 years of limbo, this spring will be even more a cause of celebration and jubilation, a time to wake up, or as Cummings puts it, now the ears of my ears awaken, now the eyes of my eyes are opened. You need no invitation from me to join in a sense of enhanced sensory joy at this change of season. For here we are once again on the wheel of time in the cycle of seasons at the spring equinox. And here we are awakening from our long winter's nap and readjusting to life that begins to approach the norm that we knew in the time before the pandemic, which cast a sickly grayness over our lives. You may know, if you were a longtime member of this church, at least a few years member, that I had the strange back-to-back honor of being the worship associate to Reverend Rose for the service of March 8th, 2020, the last normal service we had before the shutdown, and of leading the service on March 15th of that year, the first of the virtual services, preaching to a largely empty room and imagining all of you seated at home, but in my mind's eye, seated here in this hall. But now, here you are, not imagined as through a glass darkly, but face to face, and wholly so, and I tell you, it feels great. And after a long winter or an even longer period of partial isolation, it's time to get up. It's time for a wake-up call. I had the honor of doing the Yuletide service this past December, and when we were mapping out the services for the first half of 2022, and Reverend Rose noted that March 20th needed an officiant, I jumped upon it, the service for the vernal equinox. As I said yes, there was only one thing in my mind, the opening poem of William Carlos Williams' Spring and All, which I read earlier. I hadn't read the poem in years and only vaguely recalled it, but there it was, and truly an amazing poem it is. The poem was published in 1923 at a point when Williams was beginning his long association with the General Hospital in Passaic, New Jersey, as a pediatrician. Imagine Williams in his Model T on the road to the contagious hospital, an image even more resonant this year as we come out of this long quarantine of sorts. Williams' day job as a pediatrician had him on the road a lot, visiting patients in Rutherford or heading to the hospital in Passaic. He would jot down things that struck him throughout the day on a prescription pad, and later in his attic office, he would craft these momentary observations or snippets of conversations that he heard on his rounds into poems. The image we get in the poem on the surface is largely desolate. In the fields by the road to the hospital, what Williams sees are broad, muddy fields, brown with dried weeds, patches of standing water, leafless vines, dead brown leaves. And the day is cold, as March in New Jersey would be. But we would be cheating ourselves if we came away with a sense of this world as if it were the setting of some Mad Max movie. And Williams, the doctor, as well as the poet, knows better. Life is percolating somewhere below the surface, for we live in a cycle of death and rebirth, of movement from winter to spring. But spring's approach in the poem is less than inviting. Lifeless in appearance, sluggish, dazed spring approaches. That does not sound promising, but more like Frankenstein's monster lumbering along. There are snatches of something vibrant, though. The red buds starting to show their stuff, the reddish, purplish, forked, upstanding, twiggy stuff of bushes and small trees. And that happens, Williams tells us, all along the road. And the grass had started to come back, And tomorrow there'll be the stiff curl of wild-carrot leaf. And in the days that follow, one by one, objects are defined. Words that suggest to my ears the creation narrative in Genesis, where God names and defines things and the world takes shape. But Williams is emphatic in what caught his creative mind. They enter the new world naked, cold, uncertain of all, save that they enter. A point that he reiterates later in a variation. But now, the stark dignity of entrance. As Williams was a pediatrician, now later will come the joyous spring that we see in Cummins, but now there's just the stark dignity of entrance. As Williams was a pediatrician and saw his fair share of babies soon after birth, I feel that this is likely how he viewed the newborns who enter the world naked, cold, uncertain of all, save that they enter. And he wants to honor that entrance and its dignity. And yet Williams was a romantic. His favorite poet in his student days was Keats, and he ends the poem on what I see as a romantic touch, that the profound change has already happened to these uncertain things, and though spring and life may have entered sluggish and dazed, it does come to life. The plants, rooted, grip down and begin to awaken, just as a newborn begins to reach out and hold fingers and thumbs even before it can properly see. There's a lot that can be made of this poem and the collection, Spring and All, from which it comes. When it came out in 1923, the most famous poem by an American at the time was likely T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which had been published a year earlier. Williams was impressed by Eliot as a poet, but felt that Eliot had done American poetry a disservice by sending poetry back to the university, rather than making it accessible to regular folk. I see Williams' poem as an answer to Eliot, meeting Eliot's disillusion and despair at life in the wasteland with the doctor's patience and hope, and seeing in a rough beginning the promise of life anew. I could say more, but a service entitled Williams versus Eliot, World Poetry Federation Smackdown will have to wait for another day. For today, let's just take a moment to reflect on what it would mean, what it would feel like to feel the sap moving in the trees. Let's consider that nature had been sleeping like toad, but now is ready to get up and live again and bloom. Let's think of all that life contained in the seed planted in the ground as things quicken and as it begins to take root and then to awaken. For we are part of nature. Leo Kottke, in the song that you heard at the beginning, reminds us that some of us breathe in the brown ground where the worms clown, where the worms clown, where the worms clown. Williams' poem is quite particular in its reference, what one could see and imagine on a country road between Rutherford and Passaic in 1922 or 23. But we lose a lot if we get stuck in the particulars, if we turn Williams' poem into a cinematic snapshot. Williams had the experience, but we have his poem, now almost 100 years old. And though Williams focuses in that poem on a particular time and a particular place, we know that his particular experience is also universal. We could have quite a similar experience in our backyard prairie here at the church, or on the road, in some out-of-the-way place. And we can find seeds of love and beauty and justice, even if they are not always visible in our busy and blustery world. They are there, and it behooves us to give them our loving attention, our creative intelligence, our hard work, so that they grow and blossom. So let's take that lesson from nature and poetry and realize that the seeds of this beloved community have already been planted in our hearts, and that the seeds of hope have taken root in our hearts and in our brains, and that we can make our garden of love and justice bloom if we will. It's time to wake up. Amen, and blessed be.
The work of the church depends on us, our generosity of time, wisdom, and financial resources. We invite you to give generously to support the ongoing work of the church. The offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation of our shared values.